Sometimes life hits you with things you just didn't see coming, problems that blindside you, worries that pile up out of nowhere, situations that feel too big, too complex, too painful to handle on your own. It's in those moments, the ones that shake your peace and test your limits, that you face a decision. Either you carry the weight yourself, trying to figure it all out, or you release it to someone greater. But that's when you have to tell yourself, let God handle it. See, most people are trained to believe that they've got to fix everything on their own. We're taught that strength means control, that we've got to grind harder, push further, figure out the plan, and make it work. But real strength, the kind that stands in storms and doesn't break, doesn't come from control. It comes from surrender. When you release the burden to God, when you say, God, this one's too much for me, I trust you with it, that's not weakness, that's wisdom. That's power. That's faith in action. Now let me talk to you about what happens when you try to carry too much. You lose your peace. You lose your sleep. Your mind starts spinning in circles, trying to solve problems that weren't yours to solve in the first place. The more you try to control, the heavier it gets. And the heavier it gets, the more exhausted you become, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, in every part of you. That's not how you were designed to live. You weren't meant to carry the whole world on your shoulders. That's God's job. Yours is to trust Him with it. Letting God handle it doesn't mean you sit back and do nothing. It means you stop trying to force outcomes and start walking in obedience. It means you do what you can with what you have, and then you release the rest. You say, God, I've done my part. Now I trust you to do yours. And guess what? He always does. He's never failed. He's never been late. He's never missed a detail. But He works best when you stop trying to do His job for Him. I know there are people listening right now who are trying to hold their life together piece by piece, struggling in silence, putting on a strong face while they're breaking down inside. You don't have to live like that. You don't have to pretend to be okay when you're not. God sees it all. He knows what you're carrying. And He's been waiting for you to say, God, I need you to take this. Because when you let go, you give Him permission to move. And He will in ways you never saw coming. There's a kind of peace that comes over you when you truly give something to God. It's not logical. It doesn't make sense to the world, but it's real. It's that deep down, unshakable calm that says, even if I don't know what's next, I know who's already there. That's faith. That's what strengthens your soul. It's the kind of trust that doesn't depend on understanding, it depends on relationship. When you know who God is, when you've seen what He can do, you stop stressing about how it'll all work out. You just know that it will. And I have seen it time and time again. People at the end of their rope, ready to give up, who finally let go and let God. And everything started to change. The situation didn't always turn around overnight, but their spirit did. Their peace returned, their strength came back. Why? Because they weren't carrying it anymore. They stopped trying to control the storm and started trusting the one who calms it. This isn't just a message, it's a choice, a daily decision. Every morning you wake up with the option to hold on to your worries or hand them over. And every time you choose to release them, your faith gets stronger. Not because the problem disappeared, but because your trust deepened. And that trust, that's the kind of faith that moves mountains. Let God handle it. It's not giving up, it's giving in to something greater. Faith doesn't grow in comfort, it grows in surrender. That's the truth. And surrender doesn't come easy for most of us. We like to feel in control. We like to know the outcome before we take the step. We want to have all the answers lined up before we say yes. But let me tell you something powerful. If you only trust God when things make sense, that's not trust. That's convenience. Real faith starts when you no longer understand, but you choose to believe anyway. When you let God handle it, truly let go and give Him control, something shifts on the inside. There's a breaking of your will, yes, but it's not to diminish you. It's to make room for the strength that only God can give. The moment you lay it down and say, Lord, I can't do this without you, you're not stepping into weakness. You're stepping into the very place where your faith begins to stretch, deepen, and take root. Because God doesn't work around your comfort zone, He works through your surrender. Now, I want you to think about something. Think about a time when you held on to something too tightly. Maybe it was a relationship, a job, a dream, a plan that you just couldn't imagine letting go of. And then life forced your hand. Things didn't go as expected. You lost control, and it hurt. But when the dust settled, you realized that what you gained, peace, clarity, strength, was far more valuable than what you were clinging to. That's the power of surrender. That's where faith begins to grow. You see, faith is not about everything going your way. It's about trusting God when it doesn't. It's about showing up with your heart wide open, even when your hands are empty. It's about saying, God, I don't get it. I don't see the path, but I trust you anyway. That's where transformation happens. That's when God begins to shape you, not into someone who avoids problems, but into someone who can walk through fire and come out stronger on the other side. You can't grow faith in theory. You grow it in the trenches when the bank account is low, when the diagnosis is unclear, when the door doesn't open. And in those moments, you're faced with a decision. Will you fight to control, or will you choose to surrender? Every time you choose surrender, your faith muscles are exercised. They stretch, they ache a little, but they grow. Let me be real with you. There are times when surrender feels like defeat. You're tired, you've prayed, you've cried, you've done everything you can, and still it feels like nothing is changing. But listen, faith isn't about what you feel, it's about what you know deep in your spirit. And what you know is this: God is still in control, even when it doesn't look like it. He's still working behind the scenes, even when you can't see the progress. And every time you choose to surrender again, you're telling your soul, God's got this, I don't have to. We live in a world that tells you to never let go, never back down, never stop hustling. But the kingdom of God works differently. In His kingdom, you rise by surrendering. You win by letting go. You find strength when you admit your weakness. And the more you practice that kind of surrender, the more you'll find your faith isn't just surviving, it's thriving. You want strong faith? You want peace in the middle of the storm? Then let go of the need to figure it all out. Let go of the lie that you're the one holding everything together. That's not your job. Your job is to trust, to follow, to release. And every time you do, your faith grows deeper, stronger, more unshakable. Not because life gets easier, but because you've learned how to rest in the hands of the one who never failed. Surrender isn't a one-time thing. It's daily, sometimes hourly, sometimes minute by minute. But it's in that consistent letting go that you begin to notice something. The fear starts to fade. The anxiety starts to lose its grip. The pressure that used to paralyze you begins to lift. Why? Because your faith is no longer built on what you can do, it's built on who God is. And when your faith is built on Him, nothing can shake it. Not the storms, not the setbacks, not the silence, because you've surrendered the outcome, and in doing so, you've invited God to take over. And He always does better with your life than you ever could. Let God grow your faith by surrendering what you've been trying to control. We live in a world that's always in a hurry. Everybody wants things fast, fast results, fast answers, fast breakthroughs. But let me tell you something about faith. It doesn't grow in the fast lane. It grows in the waiting. It's built in the space between the promise and the fulfillment. And in that space where things are uncertain, where time feels like your enemy, where silence gets loud, That's where God is doing some of his deepest work. That's where patience is born. That's where trust is refined. Now, I'm not talking about sitting around doing nothing. I'm not saying be passive or lazy. I'm saying there's a difference between moving in faith and forcing an outcome. Some of us are trying to push doors open that God is clearly closed, or rush through seasons he's called us to walk through slowly. And when it doesn't happen on our timeline, we start to question him. But faith says, even when I don't see it happening yet, I know God is still working. That kind of faith doesn't come easy. It comes through surrendering to God's timing again and again. It's hard to wait, especially when you know God gave you the vision. When you felt it so clearly in your spirit, you ask, if this came from you, why is it taking so long? And it's in that question right there that your faith is either going to weaken or grow, because the waiting season is never wasted. God doesn't delay to frustrate you. He delays to develop you. There are lessons in the waiting that you can't get anywhere else. There's character being shaped. There's strength being formed. And sometimes God is doing just as much in you as he's preparing to do for you. I've seen people walk away from what God had for them, not because he said no, but because they got tired of waiting on his yes. They took matters into their own hands and ended up settling for less than what was promised. Why? Because they confused delay with denial. But faith doesn't jump ship in the delay. Faith says, even if it takes longer than I expected, I trust that God's timing is perfect. I want you to hear this. Just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it's not going to. God is not limited by your clock. He's not bound by your calendar. He's not interested in rushing a process that needs to run its full course. And when you trust him enough to wait well, to stay steady, when it feels like nothing's moving, that's where your faith gets its roots. Think about it. The seed goes into the ground, and for a while, nothing appears to be happening. But underneath the surface, there's activity, there's growth, there's preparation. And if you dig it up too soon, you kill what could have been. Some of us are trying to dig up the process before it's ready. We're asking God for fruit, but we haven't let the seed take root. That's why patience is so connected to faith. You can't have one without the other. The truth is, some things take time because you need to become the kind of person who can handle the blessing you're asking for. You're not waiting for the thing. God's waiting for your maturity to catch up. He's waiting for your obedience to be consistent. He's waiting for your trust to deepen to the point where you don't need the outcome to feel secure. You just need his presence. That's when you're ready. That's when the door opens. I know it's not easy. I know it feels like everyone else is moving ahead while you're stuck in the same place. But don't compare your process to someone else's. Their path isn't yours. Their pace isn't yours. And when you let comparison steal your perspective, you start trying to catch up to people who were never supposed to be your example in the first place. God has a tailor-made plan for you. And if you'll stay faithful, keep walking, keep trusting, he will deliver on every word he's spoken over your life. So here's the question you have to ask yourself. Can I trust God even when his timeline doesn't match mine? Can I stay patient even when I don't feel progress? Can I believe that he's working when I see no evidence? Because if you can answer yes to that, you're walking in real faith. Not surface level feel-good faith, but the kind that's built to last, the kind that doesn't crumble under pressure, the kind that endures. God's timing isn't just good, it's perfect. And when you let him handle the when while you stay focused on the who, everything will come together in ways you never imagined. There's something powerful that happens when you let God handle it, not just for your own peace, but for the story your life begins to tell. Because when you surrender the struggle, when you hand over the battle you can't fight on your own, you're not just choosing faith, you're creating a testimony. You're giving God the opportunity to turn your trial into a message, your valley into a victory, your pain into a platform, and that platform, It's not just for you, it's for others who are watching, wondering if faith actually works. Well, the truth is, most of what people remember about you won't be how perfect your life looked. They'll remember how you responded when everything was falling apart. They'll remember the peace you had in the middle of the storm. They'll remember the strength in your voice when it would have made sense to fall apart. That's what moves people. That's what inspires. That's what testifies to the power of God at work in your life. I know some of you have been through seasons that felt like breaking points. Dark moments, disappointments, betrayals, losses that shook you to your core. And maybe in the middle of it, you couldn't see any purpose in the pain. It just felt like chaos, like God had gone silent. But let me tell you something. God doesn't waste pain. Not a single tear, not a single unanswered question, not a single lonely night. Every part of that story is being shaped into something that will speak life, faith, and hope into someone else's situation. You're not just surviving, you're being prepared to shine. And you know what else happens when you let God handle it? You start to live with a confidence that isn't rooted in circumstances. You stop needing everything to go right in order to feel okay. That's a different kind of power, because now your peace doesn't come from how things look, it comes from who you've trusted with it. That kind of faith speaks louder than any sermon. It becomes a living testimony. When someone says, "I don't know how you made it through that divorce," or "I don't know how you kept going after losing that job," or "How did you survive that diagnosis?" you get to say, "It wasn't me. I gave it to God, and He carried me through." That's not cliche. That's not a religious tagline. That's the raw truth of someone who's walked with God through the fire and came out not smelling like smoke. And what's amazing is God doesn't just deliver you quietly. He delivers you in a way that makes others take notice. He sets you up to be a witness, not just of His existence, but of His power, His grace, His timing, and His love. That's why letting God handle it is never a loss. It's a setup. A setup for Him to show out in your life, a setup for the miraculous, a setup for impact that goes far beyond what you can see right now. Your testimony isn't just what God did for you, it's what someone else needs to hear so they know He can do it for them too. That's how faith spreads. That's how hope multiplies. When you stop hiding your scars and start showing people what healing looks like, they begin to believe healing is possible for them too. And maybe that's the whole point. Maybe the thing you thought would break you is the very thing God is going to use to bless someone else. And don't worry if your story still feels messy. Some of the greatest testimonies come from people who are still in process. You don't have to have it all wrapped up in a bow for God to use it. Just be real, be honest. Let people see that yes, you struggled, yes, you doubted, yes, you cried, but you didn't quit. You let God handle it, and that made all the difference. So if you're in the middle of something right now and you're thinking, why is this happening to me? Maybe flip the question. Maybe ask, what if this is happening for me? What if this is part of something bigger than I understand right now? What if the story being written through this season will be the very thing that gives someone else the courage to believe? Because it will. It already is. Letting God handle it doesn't just change your life, it sets your life up to change others.